Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join this meeting. I'm not advocating, I'm giving you the context and purpose of why I'm talking to you. I'm being asked by Velma, Dr. Velma, who works with Mr. Raj, who's the editor-in-chief of the new Athena International Journal of Education, which was launched last week very successfully. And in that launch, we told you that we were against the deadline. I think Velma's against the deadline. And one of the things that I suggested, not being aware of all the process of publishing the magazine, I said it's helpful to give writers, if you're going to make this a regular feature, some updates. Now, some of you, you've had your articles published, some of you, but others, we've got the second issue to come. So we will be doing a regular monthly update. Writing for a journal and sharing best practices is probably new to many of us. It was new to me, quite a long way in. Writing, one of the things I was talking to Mr. Mahanid right at the beginning, and we're promoting in schools, is express activities. Is the notion of audience. And one of the hardest thing to get over with writing for publications is that notion of who you're writing for. If you know who you're writing for, then you know the kind of approach that you need to take. So what I wanted to just take you through was some tips, for those of you who've already written, congratulations. Those of you who've had the article published, we will be sharing tips and making sure, giving the onus to the author, because we want published work that is the author's. And let me explain that. I'm sorry to mention the KHDA, but some of you will know my role. One of my roles at the KHDA was I edited every inspection report. And many of the inspectors used to complain that, the report never reflected what they said. I'm afraid it did. It reflected the judgments they gave. Now, in editing KHDA inspection reports, I could change anything because it was the organisation that's publishing the reports, not the individual. When you're writing for a journal and your articles come for editing, they shouldn't be edited that much, because if they get edited too much, they cease to be your work and the named author. So I wanted to just take you through what, if there's an editing process in journal articles, the changes editors made shouldn't be published without the author's permission. So the process moving forward was, we were up against deadlines, but the process moving forward will be, for the second issue, articles, they will be reviewed against the criteria and sent back to the author, and they will decide whether they want to make the changes or not. And if they don't want to make the changes, the article won't be published. And it is so, but it remains the author's work. We want to give integrity to the author's work. We want to really promote and improve the standard of, improve the profile of Athena as a serious player in the educational market, as somebody who not just contributes to buying schools, but contributes to the educational ideas which improve learning outcomes for students. So this, the launch of the journal is an ambitious one, and it's Mr. Raj's ambition. And like everything Mr. Raj does, it's incredibly ambitious. Which is a fantastic tribute to him. His vision is extraordinary. And I understand that vision. And we're all contributing it. And what better way, and this is Mr. Raj's vision, is to promote the work of his own teachers. So I'm just going to briefly go through, I'm not going to go into detail. for those who haven't done PhDs and, master's degrees recently, don't worry, you're in good company. I haven't done my PhD either. But those of you who know, if you're writing for any publication, whether it be a journal, an educational publication, there are rules and protocols and structures that need to be followed. Because you can quickly, if you don't follow certain protocols or don't follow certain guidelines, it can lead to your publication, and the emphasis on the first part of that word, public, your ideas and the work that you are doing, it goes public. So if you stray outside, and I'm not talking about not being creative, you be creative within parameters. If you stray outside the kind of protocols, you lay yourself open to challenge when you say or do things or offer writing in public. So moving forward, this is a tip, those that have been published, follow the protocols, no problem. And obviously, and those that are about to be also know this. So forgive me if I'm repeating information. And I've written quite extensively for government, and I've written quite extensively for academic institutions. So taking through my tips for writing a good article, and for those of you who are about to write or review your writing for the second edition, I want you to consider this. The first thing, that I would say is, why are you writing this article? And I know you'll answer because Dr. Velma told us to. No. What's the purpose of the article? What's the aim? What do you want people to say about your article at the end? And very often when you start with the title, like teaching and learning, start with the end. What is it, this article, and the way I frame titles is I frame them as a question. They don't end up as a question in the publication. But if you frame, so instead of saying I want to, I'm going to write about, green Wellingtons. Wellingtons are boots, by the way, worn in just for English. I don't know why I said green Wellingtons. You wouldn't say the article's green Wellingtons. You would, in your mind, you would say, why are Wellingtons green? So you frame the title of your article as a question. What question are you going to answer in this article? That's just my way of, so then, when you're going to answer a question, you think about how you're going to structure your answer. So in articles, you've got to be able to say, well, what's the end point? What's the aim? What's the purpose? So, well, it's to answer this question. Well, so in order to answer this question, how am I going to structure it? How am I going to start? How am I going to continue the ideas? How am I going to summarize and finish at the end? Okay, so structure is really important, because if you don't have the aim in mind and you don't have it framed as a question, and then you don't do a structure, you do find articles will end up repeating and repeating and repeating the same thing. So what's the purpose? Think about then in that aim, so you then move on to what's the purpose. Part of purpose is given by who you're writing it for. And you don't know, is your answer. Well, you do, in a sense, because you're writing it for an educational journal. So you're writing it, the aim is that it will be read by educational professionals, which is very different than writing something for parents or people who are not qualified in the field. So your article should reflect who you're writing for. So if you're writing it, in this case, for educational professionals, it should follow educational protocols. And, so you really need to think in that first paragraph, who's going to read it? What is their context? They're educational professionals who have access to professional materials. And you need to think, well, what do they know already? So what's in the market on the topic? So the title of this month's edition was Teacher-Student Bond. So the question might be that you're trying to answer is, how does the teacher-student bond contribute to improved outcome for students? Or how does it contribute to emotional development? You'll all have a different take on it. So then, but if it's improved outcomes for students, that just switches the way people will read it. If you'd said, how does it impact on emotional development? And I'll illustrate why. So knowing what you want to get out of it, framing it as a question, understanding who your audience might be, what they might already know, and how will your writing contribute to an increase or a different perspective on what's already known. If you're just going to repeat somebody else's things that you've heard, then there's no point in writing it. So knowing your audience, how you're writing, how you answering the question, how teacher-student bond improves emotional development, how is it different from what's there? And then you start to shape the structure, okay? So address two things there: the purpose of your writing and who's going to read it. So the first thing you do, this is where we get into the structure of what you do. The first thing you should be doing, and this is an academic protocol, is define the terms and the parameters in your first paragraph of what you're writing about. So how does the teacher-student bond improve emotional development? So you have to define what you mean by teacher-student bond and in what context. Then you have to define what you mean by emotional development and how you're measuring the impact of that. So definitions are very much part. And it's not just here, if you don't just give opinions, you have to give opinions and back them up. I think the teacher-student bond is important. You can't just say, oh, it's like a bear. And well, yeah, it may or may not be. In an academic journal, you need to say, well, it's like a parental for these reasons. So definitions with backing up your definitions, okay, of terms in the first paragraph. And then the third element, the third A that I would draw your attention to, if you're writing to an academic forum, you need to be aware what others say about that. It's not just a forum for you to say what you think, because you can't give a balanced view and be clear that you've moved thinking on or given a different perspective if you don't know what others have said. So as it then moves on, you've given the definitions, you then say what other people have said, or present evidence of your own of what emotional development looks like in your own setting, what other people have said about emotional development, and you reference that. So awareness of where what you're writing sits within those who know about this, okay? So being aware and contrasting what you know and comparing what you know with what others know. So you don't say, well, you know, so-and-so, Howard Gardner wrote about emotional intelligence, but it's a load of rubbish. You say, well, Howard Gardner wrote about emotional intelligence, and, you know, he found that you know, just shouting at the children. He didn't, by the way. I know Howard Gardner. Shouting at the children made them grow better. However, in my own experience, observing 40 lessons, you could see that teacher-student bond grew in this way. So you compare and contrast what somebody else. So that's awareness. You must show awareness of the thinking in this particular field of the topic that you're writing on, okay? And that, I would say, is the hardest thing if you're not used to academic writing. Doesn't mean you've got to read loads and loads of books. We're not looking for PhD or MPhil kind of level referencing, but you do need to acknowledge. It's the first thing academics pick up. You know, my phone has started talking to me recently. It's very nice because nobody else does, but I don't know why it keeps doing it. Can you hear my phone? It did it yesterday. It's only when I'm talking. Somehow it likes the sound of my voice and responds. It's the only thing that does. And so those the three A's so far. Number one, what's the purpose? And you define that in the first paragraph. What's the purpose? What are the definitions? Second is, you know, recognize what your view is, put forward your proposition, what you're feeling is with evidence. Then you show awareness of what other people's view is, and then you add balance. The fourth A is probably threaded through all the other three A's. And we use this word because it keeps it nice and alliterate. It uses 4 A's. But articulation, you're probably falling asleep now because I'm not very good at articulating ideas. But believe it or not, I do have a structure in my head, and I'm going over in my head what it is I'm trying to articulate and keep referring back to the original purpose of the session, which was to give you information about how to structure articles for a journal. And I keep going back to that. Articulation, one of the biggest complaints I had about inspectors writing was they didn't reread their sentence. Many people write, and when they read it back over, are reading what's in their head. This is articulation, is that you have to check your articulation, not read what's back in your head. You have to read what's on the page, and you have to make sure that what's on the page reflects what your thoughts were and reflects your original purpose for writing. So articulation involves quite a lot of things. You know, the structure, you cannot articulate if you don't follow a structure. If one sentence doesn't lead to another and the paragraphs don't lead from one to another, you'll be surprised at how many standalone paragraphs you find in journal articles around the world, and they just don't make sense. So the structure, the clarity of the structure, the purpose of what you're trying to convey has to be clear in the articulation. And you need to check, and it's easy for me to say, I'm a first language English speaker, but the medium of this is English. So it's always wise to get somebody else to read your article out loud to you. You can do it on the computer now quite easily. Listen to your article coming back at you and ask yourself, is that what I wanted to say? Don't overcomplicate your sentences. Don't overcomplicate the writing. I had a rule in editing that no sentence, absolute limit number of words in a sentence is 20. Okay, you can imagine that's a test for somebody like me who's as verbose as I am. But go back and check the clarity of each sentence, and the first thing, check the number, the word count. It draws you into these the right number of words. Now, spelling and grammar checks are quite helpful because they make you question, and they do make suggestions now, you know, and one of the things they do correct is brevity. Could you have said this in a more concise way? So when you're articulating, is making sure your sentences are structured and each word is clear and supports the aim and purpose of your writing. Now, you've heard Mr. Raj and I spar, on most Zoom calls that are there, and we spar most about the use of the English language. I am not an expert in English language. I don't claim to be, but Mr. Raj always blames English speakers for all ills in society, which is a fair charge. I take the responsibility. But one of the things you'll hear me respond is going back to the original meaning of words, knowing what each word means. You'll be surprised how many words we use in the course of the day. We don't really know what they mean. In writing, we need to be clear, particularly if they relate to the topic that you're writing about. Okay? And, emotional development. We think we all know what emotional development is? Okay? So, is development the right word in that particular sentence? I think the other thing with articulation is what you're saying relevant to the topic. Is it? I think teacher-student bond is important. Is that relevant? What you think? Is it? For the reader, it's not. It's not important in that thing because you haven't justified it. You just said, I think it's important. What you think is irrelevant because you haven't backed it up. You haven't backed it up. This is an academic article. What you think is important in a conversation when you're dealing with your peers. But they will say to you, if you're talking to them, well, yeah, okay. Don't assume that your opinion is relevant. It might be, but you have to give reasons why it might be. Relevance is a really, really important thing. I think you're being a teacher is like a mother. It's not relevant. Not relevant. Because most teachers are not most. Many teachers aren't mothers. So you switch your audience off if you use certain words in certain way. It's sort of one that used to get me with leaders. Well, as an experienced leader, well, people. I used to get that in the UK, and everybody's sitting there. Well, I'm not. So, who do you think you are? Do you think your view is more important than mine because you've spent longer in the profession? So relevance, it ain't you, I'm afraid. I often say it's apt in the office. I'm the least relevant person in the office. I'm the least relevant person in people's lives, particularly children's. But in terms of the audience, people reading, yes, I'm the author. But if I do give opinions, they've got to be relevant and backed up and take into account the context in which they're being read. Okay, so what I've tried to do here is give you a kind of framework. It's a very loose framework. I said it wasn't going to be detailed, but number one, start off with what's the purpose and then articulate that in the first part of the article. Number two, recognize who you're writing this for, so at what level, the next paragraph you define terms and you report your findings. Next one is being aware of other work in your field and being able to express that in the essay and giving a balanced view and why your particular view is moving thinking on in that area. But overall, it's having a clear structure and ideas, and at the end you articulate, you summarize what you've said and why you've reached the conclusion of what you said. My father, God rest him, who died when I was very young, but he gave me advice that I don't follow very often. He used to say, if you've got something to say, stand up, speak up, and shut up. If he was here now, he would be saying shut up quite a lot, I know, but there's something in it. Stand up and say what you're going to say it, and then summarize what you said. So the first part of your article, say what you're going to say it with evidence and references, and then summarize what you've said. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I'll pause there, and then I'm going to finish, you'll be very pleased to know, with some tips. So with some things to remember. Does anybody want to say anything and say, who are you, Ian, to be telling us how to write articles? If you want to say that, that's fine, because it's Thursday afternoon and my hearing aid battery goes quite low on a Thursday. So you can say what you like now. This is your opportunity to say, you know, if it's revision, I apologize, but I don't think it's any harm for us all to be reminded. Is this helpful to people? Okay, so you know when if you write an article in future and it has been published and it comes back to you, this is what will be reviewed: purpose, awareness, use of other thinking in the field, summary, and conclusions. I will be, you know, if I'm editing, and that's within Dr. Velma's gift, she might not want me to have anything to do with this after this session, but that, you know, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, and having edited inspection reports and many other documents in my life, I read every single word because I make myself do it. It's actually hard to do, read every single word. Most people don't, but it's the discipline of editing and reviewing. And I make sure when I'm editing that I'm not reading what's in my head. You've got to, when you review your own article, read what's on the page, not what's in your head, and try and evaluate it as if you're the reader, the audience. As I said to you, voice technology is really helpful. Can you just go back to the things to remember video, if you don't mind, please? Thank you. Things to remember. It's great having these people controlling. It's like being in Star Wars. Can we go back to things to remember video? There we are. Things to remember. Follow the structure. Have the structure mapped out before you start. Stick to the point. Show awareness of other views and reference them properly. I haven't gone into too much detail about referencing. If you go to university, my wife is always going on about referencing. I'm not worried too much about that at this stage. We'll, as we move forward, we'll give more details, but you do need to acknowledge if somebody else has said something and you claim it as your work, that's very serious. You know, do need to reference other people's ideas without denigrating them. So your views of work on a topic. You've got to be balanced. But you can give your view once you've given the left side, the right side, and then your side's in the middle. Okay, be balanced. So if you do quote somebody else's work or work that you've done, say, you know, the word however is useful. You've got to be evaluative. And I used to give inspectors words that help them be evaluative. Although, however, given that Howard Gardner said, we need to consider X, Y, and Z. Yeah? So evaluative and balanced writing. Avoid cliches. Okay, cliches don't work unless they're quotes and you're evaluating them in journals. You know, it's like motherhood and apple pie. That's a cliche, isn't it? Teacher-student bond is a mother, you know. It's a cliche. It's not an academic perspective. you can make cliches, you can turn them into, a writing and evaluate them on whatever, but be careful about using cliches in your summaries or in your writing. Back opinions up with evidence. Okay, and make references, the work that you quote, current and relevant. One of the reasons I give us not going on to do a doctorate in education, if I ever get around to do a doctorate, is that several times I've been requested to write. I mean, I've written long guidance and thesis which would be considered for doctorates. One of the things I can't abide it. The thought of doing a doctorate of education in the UK is the first thing they do is get you to consider and review the writings of educationalists 100 years ago. I've got no problem with John Dewey or those kind of writers, but thinking's moved on. Thinking's moved on. So making your writing relevant to the now, acknowledging the past and how we've got to this point. I think if we're still going back to, I'm not saying you can't acknowledge and reference things that have gone long before, but you need to, in your writing, make them up to date. And it's no good talking about teacher, saying, well, teacher-student bonding is absolutely very important, every single lesson. What have we got at the moment? We've got a pandemic. You've got to consider how that's changed. It changes things. You've got to interact and give children a cuddle. I'm being extreme just at the point. Well, you can't. You can't at the moment. You can't do it. So that's what I mean about relevance. And people will think that. So make it relevant. I was very impressed, I have to say, with those articles that were submitted, and this session is in no way, a comment on that. It's just a recognition on my part, Mr. Raji's part, and Dr. Velma's part, that because we were trying to meet deadlines, we didn't give due deference and status to the authors. We will go into more detail the more that we want to promote this journal. We want it to be taken seriously in the educational field. So therefore we will be pushing up the standards that it's taken. We want it to be taken up seriously. To push up the standards, we need to support people. It's like I often say to teachers, we come into education very often for a passion for our own subject. We come in for a love of children's learning as well. But the love of subject really gets neglected. And I used to say to my own staff when I was principal, to the science department, when did you do an investigation at your level? And it's usually university. You said to the maths department, when did you last solve a mathematical problem, a conundrum that you were given at university at your level? And it's the same for writing. When was the last time most of us wrote, academically following protocols? Probably university. Probably. There may be differences. This is an opportunity to bring that up to date. And when was the last time we acted at a professional level on teaching and learning? I don't mean professional level in the sense of, an academic level is what I meant. Probably, again, since we trained to be a teacher. So here's an opportunity for us to develop ideas. And I hope that's been okay. Are there any questions? I'll pause. Are there any questions? Mr. Mahaney's not normally quiet.
No.
Me, I can see writ large. Is there anything I've said that anybody, Mr. Mahaney knows, I'm not picking on him, I can just see his face. So I'm looking at the participants, see if there's anybody else I can pick on, because you're all so welcome. But, if Mr. Mahaney knows, Bilal knows, I think you all know, Felicia knows, and Simi knows, I think, those of you who have been to Kerala. I like it. I like this agreement, so I'm very happy for anybody to ask any questions at all.
Just one query. You were talking about the relevance to our opinions. So, does that mean that it has to be a case study kind of a thing, or it can be from anything from our own experience?
It can be from your experience, but you need to cross-reference that with other people's view in the field. So, my experience tells me this. You know, I don't subscribe to the view that all academic writing should be written in the third person. There is a place for the first person, and then of course, but you must reflect what that experience tells you. Don't just say, "Well, I had a good experience in the class with grade 4 children, and they all loved my teaching." That's what does it tell? What does it contribute to the educational thinking? So when I tried open-ended questions, the response in this particular class was X, Y, and Z. However, that contrasts sharply with what Piaget said with the 4 areas of development. So it's always been balanced, but you can use your own experience. But yes, but you must cross-reference it and balance, and not just say, well, because I do learning objectives and the results are always brilliant. I'm brilliant at learning objectives. No, that's not how it works. But yes, you can use your personal. I use them all the time in terms of analogy, my personal experience. But I don't use my personal experience to claim that it's right. I use my personal experience to say that was where I got my view from. However, to give you the context, other people have got different experiences, which may lead to a different conclusion. Okay? Does that answer, Simi? It's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? You're not writing a blog, and I think that's the difference. I'm going to say that
Exactly.
personally. It's more formal. So saying, I like cheese on my bread or whatever, that's too personal. That's irrelevant. So it's got to have certain academic focus. I'm sorry to use that, but I'm not sorry to use that. It's a different. We're writing for a different audience. This is to mark Athena out and you out as players in the educational field and furthering thinking on, how we improve education. So it's got to follow a certain process. Anybody else got any other questions?
Let me digest then and answer you if I need anything else. You know me, Mr. Ian.
Yeah, I do know you, Mr. Mohammed. Does anybody want to disagree and think, well, what the heck have I been talking about for the last 30 minutes? You can. The battery's quite low on the hearing aid.
No, that was very informative. Thank you, Mr. Ian. And yeah, it reminded us of academic writing. It was for us a bit of I will not say a surprise that we'll have to do some contributions, but for me, I was not that ready, but I took that challenge. And with the busy days, it was very challenging.
Well, your work was all your work's being published. Those for the second issues we will probably, because we've got time in the light of this, those that are going to be published in the second issue, we will send your articles back with your comments, and then you can contact me individually. We will send this presentation round. I will be giving more information through Dr. Velma on writing. Be careful, because one of the reasons I never went into academia, as it's described, was because I actually think the more academic you get, the less creative you get, because they made you follow such stringent protocols. So I don't want to go down that route and say you have to follow footnotes in this form and referencing in this form. We've got to work it out, but we do need to follow some of them. I'm very struck by, one of my areas has been the education of so-called gifted and talented students. And I remember an academic writing, Swedish academic writing, you know, he said, well, actually, those academics who write about gifted and talented are neither gifted nor talented, because it's all been strangled out of them through the process of academia, because they have to do footnotes here and this, that, and the other, and they can't express creative ideas. So, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I'm not giving a view or a judgment on it here, but you know, there is a point. Don't get so constrained by the protocols. That's not what we want to happen. But if we don't have some protocols, we won't be taken seriously in the field as an educational journal. So, you know, so I'm starting off with the structure. I'm starting off being aware of thinking in the field and referencing and, you know, backing up opinions, and then we'll move on together. So I've tried to be not overload you with the kind of referencing. I don't want to restrict creativity, but there are certain things we will push back on. We have to, but otherwise it's no point in doing this. Okay, but thank you very much. We will send the presentation round, and thank you very much.